You finally decided on what awesome game idea you're going to be making for your next project. But immediately you already get some questions. And one of the main questions that I especially get a lot when I do the coaching on our Patreon is, how long should this game take? How long should I plan for this to take? What are some key milestones I should hit? Because if you've never really completely planned a game, it can be really hard to do that. So I figured, because I got the questions so often, I would just make a video about it and go a bit more in depth into what we use here to kind of plan long-term, how are we going to develop our games. So we already made a video about the short-term planning, basically in terms of issues, GitLab boards, Kanban, and working in sprints like that. This video is more about the long-term, 6 months out, 1 year out planning of making your game and having some key checkpoints along the way of making a demo, joining some festivals and things like that. Now, if you're not certain why you should even bother with that long-term planning, let me tell you, it's probably one of the most important things you can do, because sure, you can have a game idea, but if every morning you just wake up and you decide to work on your game, but you don't have that long-term vision, you're going to keep expanding your game. You're gonna keep falling into scope creep, and it's most likely never going to be finished. It's just going to be one more project in Unity or Godot or whatever that you've gone on 60% of the way there, but you just didn't finish because you felt like you weren't making the progress you were looking for. Now, the first thing that I want you to do, and all of this planning is useless if you don't do this, is determine your scope. If you don't know what game you're going to be making, it's going to be impossible to figure out how long it will actually take you to make that game, because you don't even know what you're fully going to implement. So I've talked about this before, but write down your game idea. We have the one-page game design document. I'll link the video down below again. And we also made 2 videos recently, one about scope creep in general, and then also our feature tier list that talks a bit more about what features you should and shouldn't have in your game. Know these things when you go in, because this is going to be very important to determining how long your game will take. So have that game design document, like one-page document, or if you really want, you can do up to 5, but know what should your end game look like. It's going to change still, that's no problem, but you do need to have a solid baseline for what you're going to use for doing the rest of this planning. Once you have that game design document, step 1 is, do I have all my features and mechanics listed out that I want my game to have? This one is pretty easy, so you should be able to do that. The second thing is, make an anti-feature list. This is something I talk about in the scope creep videos as well. Simply say, these are some features I will never implement. No way in hell. I'll just be making a different game then, instead of trying to implement a shop system or RPG based leveling or whatever. Have that anti-feature list as well. Then determine, how long do I want my game to be? For example, let's say you're making a roguelite shooter and you want your game to, let's say, have 8 hours of play duration. This is something I see a lot with people who want to immediately go for 6 to 20 hours of total game duration. First thing I want you to do is slash that in half and aim for half of that. So if you have an original scope for a game that takes about 8 hours to complete, go for one that has 4. Trust me, getting that much playtime that is actually feels meaningful and not just padded out with just needless difficulties and whatever, is going to be much more important, and you're better off just having a shorter, more concise and more refined game than a much longer one that has been kind of artificially padded. Your players will notice and they won't like it. Then what I want you to do as well is to have a confidence factor. This is where I'm okay, look, don't worry about the planning too much. If you read this game and you envision it, how confident are you that you can actually make it? For example, if you're gonna be making a simple 2D platformer, you'll probably have a 10 out of 10 confidence that you can actually make it. Whereas if you wanna make a Breath of the Wild-like open world RPG, that's more like a 2 out of 10 or whatever. What I would suggest you to have is to go for a game that at the first idea, you have about a 5 to a 7 out of 10 confidence factor. Because you'd still want to challenge yourself a little bit. You don't want to make something that's a 10 out of 10, because then you'll have the issue that it's probably going to be very easy for other people to make as well, which means it's very competitive, which means that selling it or actually getting it marketed is going to be a lot harder. If you go for that 5 out of 10 to 7 out of 10, you're going to be pushing yourself to learn more, and you're going to be entering something that, 90% of the other people who are watching this video but who have the same idea as you will probably not be able to reach it, because they will give up somewhere along the way, which makes it a lot easier for you to stand out because there's simply less competition. And then lastly, you can start by setting an ideal release date. So maybe you're hey, let me do it before the end of the year or whatever. You can do that, have it as a guideline, but do add at least like 2-3 months to it, depending on how far in the future it is. You're always going to overshoot whatever your estimate is. So now you have those things, let's get to work on actually figuring out how long it will take. The first thing you need to figure out here is, okay, on average, how many hours a week can I work on my game? I've heard a lot of different ranges. Some people are like, I can only work 5 hours a week, and others are like, yeah, I'm fully in the grind set, I'm gonna go 80-hour work weeks. And that is going to be very important in determining how long your game's gonna take to release. If you only have 5 hours a week to work on your game, you're probably not going to be releasing a game in 3 months from now, unless you're really limiting the scope and how much gameplay your game will actually have. Now we're going to take that release date that you set earlier, so just for example, I'm going to release in December, and we're actually going to calculate, okay, assuming I have 10 hours a week available, how many hours do I actually have between now and my planned release date to make this game? So let's assume I have 20 hours of time a week and I'm planning on releasing in December, which is 10 months from now. That means I have about 800 hours to go from the current stage of my game to when it's released, which when you hear that, it's probably going to be pretty acceptable. You know, 800 is a large number, you can probably get a lot done there. Whereas if maybe you have a release in 6 months from now and you can only work about 10 hours a week, that's only 240 hours of budget you have basically to release your game. Do you still feel confident now? This is going to be like your first litmus test where you hear that very like crude number of, okay, I have 200 hours to make this game. Is this actually going to be possible? And usually, remember that confidence factor? Let's say it was a 7, maybe it has dropped down like a 5 now, which is still alright, but if you started at a 5 and then you're going down to like a 3 with that current scope, that's probably not going to be ideal. So if you're not confident, there are 3 different variables you can like slide around to get that confidence level up again. The first one, and the one that I suggest you do as well, is to simply reduce your scope. This is going to be the one that you can do pretty much the easiest. So maybe you were planning multiplayer at first as well, or you wanted to add like an extra piece of story mode, maybe shorten it a little bit, cut down the scope, and then maybe suddenly 240 hours of work sounds a lot more feasible. If cutting down the scope isn't really an option for you, you can always delay the game. So just add a few more months to your game. So you can go up to like maybe 300 hours of budgeted time for your game. And if you feel more confident then I'm happy for you and we can stick with that new like delayed release date. You want to delay it as early as possible, not just like 2 weeks before you're gonna launch basically. And then the last option you can do is simply work more hours in a week. Now this is the hardest to do and I suggest you don't really go too hard on this. Maybe you can squeeze in like 5 hours more each week, but you can't suddenly go from 10 hours a week to 80 hours a week or whatever. You do want to try and limit your crunch because you're going to notice you're probably going to have to crunch anyway. So let's not start by planning for you to crunch on day 1 of your project. Once you've reached that like ideal release date, you've calculated how many hours you have and you have a confidence factor of around 7, let's say, then we can start with the next stage of our planning, which is what I like to call backplanning. So how this works is instead of saying like, hey, today we're February, in March I want to have my Steam page up, and then maybe let's say in May a demo, what we're actually going to do is we're going to look at the final product first. I want to release a game in August, for example. And then from there, we're going to work our way back to find the different steps we need to do along the way. So assuming we want to have a V1 release in August, what do we need to do before then? Well, you'll probably want to join festivals such as a Steam Next Fest. What's the last Steam Next Fest before I launch my game? Probably gonna be in this case the one in June. So then you know, hey, I should have a Steam Next Fest demo ready by June. And then you can keep going from there. Okay, assuming I want to have that demo for Steam Next Fest up in June, I shouldn't have it like only up the day before Next Fest. I need to have it a bit more in advance. So let's say in May, I'll already have a first basic demo that I can like start bug fixing a bit so my demo for the Next Fest won't be as buggy anymore. We did that mistake with Forge Industry. Like we had never tested our demo really up until right when we started Next Fest, which meant our game constantly crashed and was literally unplayable. Don't do that. Have that safeguard of like a month in advance, you get a first demo out. And then we continue. Assuming you want to have the demo out in April, you'll probably need to have a Steam page up at least a month in advance so you can gather up those wish lists, because otherwise, if you don't have at least 6 months between posting your Steam page online and actually releasing the game, you're going to have more issues with marketing and gaining that like 7,000 or 10,000 or however many wish lists that you're gonna end up with. If you're just putting up the Steam page like 2 weeks before the game comes out, you will be shooting yourself in the foot enormously with marketing. And then we can keep going from there. Okay, I have the store page. Now I need to get screenshots for that store page. So I will probably need to have like a first rough proof of concept, like a rough draft of my game even earlier than that. So let's say that's in March. And by having all of these points, you've got a much more solid planning, in my opinion, than if you were just to estimate when things are going to be done in the progress where you just go like from prototype to Steam page to demo. That's just what I've noticed. We're not as good as planning if we don't start with the end goal first. So I encourage you to try out that backplanning. Now, once you have that, once again, I've said things like, oh, I need to have a demo up in May. I need to have a Steam page up in, let's say, March. How's that confidence factor now? Are you still at a 6 or a 7 out of 10? If not, remember, we need to tweak the sliders. Something's gonna have to give. Maybe you're gonna have to delay later. Maybe you're gonna have to cut down that scope. You can keep looping this back planning until you find something that you're happy with, that you actually feel confident that you'll be able to make, but it won't be like too easy for you. There should still be some challenge. And then once that back planning is done, this is where we get into the more nitty-gritty agile stuff, where you're going to be working with sprints, you're going to be actually filling up your Kanban board, and you do this by looking at all of the different like key milestones you achieved through that back planning, such as having that store page, such as having that prototype. And here you're going to look at, okay, what should my deliverables be? So these are generally quite easy of like, hey, for the demo on NextFest, I need all of my base mechanics implemented and I need like 10 minutes of playable level available. Whereas for your prototype, it may just be like, hey, I need to have one scene available. I need to be able to take some screenshots basically, and that's it. If I just implement only the core mechanic already, I would see that as enough for now. So you can break down every big deliverable into the smaller things, such as certain mechanics, certain enemies, certain parts of your story or whatever, depending on your game. And this is then where you're going to go and fill up that Kanban board. Could be a Trello, could be a Notion, could be a GitLab like ours. If you're interested in that, there's a video up there where I covered it before, so that's not really the scope of this video. This is more just the long-term planning. And then once you've done that, I would schedule in at least one time a month where you just do a check with yourself. Even if you're a solo developer, you're going to have a meeting with yourself basically, where you're going to be the customer, where you're going to check, okay, how is my schedule? Am I still hitting my milestones on time, or am I not going to hit my targets? If you're not gonna hit your targets, once again, something's gonna have to give, whether it's more hours, whether it's delaying, or whether it's reducing scope, but do these things as fast as possible. If your confidence drops, change the scope or change the deadline or whatever, go through that loop again of, hey, do the back planning, see if you need to change something. Changing your planning or scope, like I said, it isn't bad. It's only bad if you do it like very last minute and very uncontrolled. The earlier you can plan for scope changes, the better it's going to be. Because you should understand that, look, these first games you're gonna make, no matter how many videos you watch about the optimal timeline for game development or whatever, you're going to be off. We wanted to make Forge Industry in a single month, and it ended up taking us 18 months. So that was like very extreme already. Now with Songs of Everjade, we planned for about 4 months, and we're now looking more at 6 months, which is still all right, because we already realized like 1 or 2 months in development that, hey, we're not hitting those milestones we had set out for ourselves. So let's look again, what's going to give? Are we gonna work more hours? Are we gonna cut our scope, or are we just going to delay? So now we've delayed it by like 2 months-ish, and then we'll see, are we going to keep hitting our milestones and things like that. So I hope this is like a quick video about doing that high-level planning. Do this. This is very easy to do. It shouldn't take you a lot of time once you've got that scope nailed down, and it is going to save you a lot of headaches, like working towards the future, actually filling up those Kanban boards with the things that you need to do, and not just the things that you think about right in the moment when you start up your engine and you're deciding, what should I work on today? Anyways, that's all I really have to say. I'm curious about you, once you've gotten that first game design document and like your first initial release date planned, what was your initial confidence rate back then? Were you a 10 out of 10, or were you like, once you actually had to sit down and think about how confident am I that I'm gonna do this in like 100 hours, were you like a 2 out of 10? I'm really curious to see a bit more about how good your like intuitive planning is basically. So leave that in the comments down below. Apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope this was an informative video. Don't forget to subscribe down below if you like videos like this, where we talk about game development and we talk about some of the things that we've learned along the way, making our own games and planning them in this case. That's all I had to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!